Good morning. My name is Sarah. Um, I have been a hand quilter for probably about 10 years on and off. Um, I've noticed there have been a lot of questions on how to go about hand quilting and what you need to get started. So I decided I was going to make a video series to explain how I go about hand quilting, because I do traditional hand quilting. I don't do big stitch. And I'm all self-taught. I learned from video clips and from forums and trying to understand through books, and videos are the most helpful. But I also don't hand quilt probably the correct way, as if your grandma taught you. So, but it works for me, and I think I get some pretty good results. So what do you need to start hand quilting? You need your basted quilt top. You need a finished quilt top. You can pin baste it, you can thread baste it, you can spray baste it. I usually thread baste because I have a lot of old thread from my grandmother, and it snaps when you pull it, so it's not good for anything, which is also why I have some threads in my thread basting that are broken. But I didn't want to just throw it out. Pin basting to me is probably the most inconvenient way of hand quilting, because the pins will often get in the way of where your hoop is. You do need some hand quilting thread, so there are options out there. I've been using Gutermann thread on this quilt because it comes in more colors, and I wanted a lot of colors for this quilt top. In the past, I have used the Coates and Clark, I don't know if it's going to zoom, hand quilting thread, just their regular, this is red. I've used theirs in white and green, I think, are the other colors, but they don't have as many options, which is why I switched to this for this quilt. I do like the Gutermann better. It is a little more expensive though. I like that it doesn't tangle as fast. But Coates and Clark also makes a bold hand quilting thread. It's a little bit thicker. I don't know if you can see on my finger that it's thicker. I did this little, there goes my quilt loop. So the white is the bold hand quilting, and I realize I'm on white fabric, so you can't really see that so well. The red is the regular Coates and Clark, and this gold is the Gutermann thread. The Gutermann and the red are just your regular 40 weight, I believe, thread. It's a little thicker than your typical thread you'd use in a sewing machine. The bold hand quilting thread is a 10 weight, so it's very thick. Maybe you can see it a little bit better on the back here. I'm trying to catch it with the light. That is your bold, thicker thread, whereas the gold and the red are both 40 weight thread. You can use either. The bolder thread is harder to pop the knot, bury the knot in the quilt top, but it is possible. What else do you need? Another popular brand is YLI brand. I've never used it because it's not available in my local Joann's, and that's where I get thread. Hand quilting thread, though, is different than machine quilting thread. It's usually coated, I think it's with wax, I don't know, but it's so that it doesn't tangle as fast. You do not want to use this in your sewing machine. It will not work right. But it is stronger than regular piecing thread because it is thicker. You also need quilt needles to quilt with. Betweens are the quilting betweens. That's what's traditionally used in hand quilting thread. I like the John James size 9. I've gotten a whole packet of them. But when you're just starting out, I would recommend getting a variety pack. I don't like these ones so much. They have a bigger eye, and I make it little harder, the needle feels a little thicker to me to push through the quilt top. A lot of this is going to be personal preference. Just this, the larger the number, the smaller the needle is. So like this in the middle here is going to be a size 3, whereas I think I used all the size 9, so this one might be a size 8. The needle eye is bigger on a smaller sized needle. It doesn't make much sense to me. But I would get a variety pack, because when I first started, I could not use a size 9 needle. The size 9 was very hard for me to use. But the more I have hand quilted, the smaller the needle has gotten. It's just easier for me. I don't know. It's something that comes with time, and you have to try a couple different needles out to figure out what works for you. You don't need to use a hoop. I prefer one. Some people quilt without one. I have done an entire quilt without one because I wanted to give it a shot. And because the hoop I had at the time was this, I don't even know if I can get it all in the camera frame. This is an 18-inch hoop. This was actually my great-grandmother's hoop, so it's kind of special to me. I never quilted with her. She died when I was 6, I want to say. So, yeah. I've since gotten this smaller hoop. This is a Edmonds hoop. This is a, like, I think you can see that the hoop is thicker. This one is more sturdy than this. This is probably a Dritz. Yeah, this is a Dritz hoop. So, but it works. I just got this one on my last hand quilting project. So I have finished 2 queen size and 1 king size hand quilt by hand, as well as 2 throw quilts. So this is my 4th large bed size quilt that I'm quilting. And I really do prefer this smaller hoop over the bigger one. It's less bulky, I want to say. When you're picking a hoop size, it was recommended to me that you measure from your fingertips, where you're going to hold it, to your elbow crease. So when you put the hoop, you can hold the hoop in your hand like this without any issues, and then you can reach. It doesn't matter where you're at, you're always going to be able to reach underneath wherever you're at in the quilt. Nothing's going to be awkward. You can quilt without a hoop. There's also floor hoops. There's also where they're this round one, but they're on a stand, and you like pull it over top of you. I don't have one of those. There's also the big floor frames that you've probably seen, like, if you've looked it up at least, like Amish people quilt with them. They're giant, and the whole quilt fits in it, and there's rails, and it rolls it. I also don't have room for one of those, so this little hoop is what I use. And then comes where I think the most variety in quilting, hand quilting is when it comes to thimbles. I use one thimble. I use a Clover adjustable ring thimble, and I use it on my pointer finger. If you follow the books, you're supposed to use it on your middle finger, and you use the tip of your finger to guide the needle. I have fat fingers. I have not been able to find a thimble that fits well on my middle finger, that it's comfortable to use. So I've adapted my quilting style to use a ring thimble. There are many kinds of thimbles. I have a whole jar of thimbles that I have gone through before I found that this is the style I like. There are leather thimbles. There's probably these that you've seen at the big box stores. I think these are the Clover ones. This kind of fits on my finger, but on my middle finger, it is very uncomfortable. Let me get this one out. There's thimbles that are open in the back, so if you have fingernails, this would work for you because your fingernail would go over the edge. This one you're also going to use probably the pad of your finger rather than the tip of your finger to quilt with. There's also silicone thimbles. I don't have those. I think there's a couple other styles, but once I found this one and it worked, I stopped looking for more thimbles. That's just where I was. I'm good. I only wear one thimble on my pointer finger. Some people have them on their bottom hand. I just build up a callus because I want to be able to feel when the needle tip hits my finger so that I know I need to rock it back. Some people also wear them on their thumb. I've also built up a little bit of a callus on the tip of my thumb from quilting back and forth. It's just something that happens. What else do you need? That's really all you need. I mean, you need scissors so you can snip your thread. But other than that, that's all you really need. You're going to want to mark, if you're not just echo stitching, where you're going to go like follow just on the outside. I do not recommend stitching in the ditch when hand quilting because you're going to be going through more layers of fabric and your fingers will hate you. And if you've pressed your seams open, then you're just going to be stitching through the threads that held the layers of fabric together. You're not going to be actually stitching through fabric. So a lot of people will echo stitch, so they'll stitch about a 1/4 inch away from the seam. That way you're not going through your seam allowance and you're going just on the outside of it, where you're only going through fabric, batting, fabric, rather than fabric, 2 layers of seam allowance, batting, and backing. It's easier, and your fingers will much appreciate you for that. When you're hand quilting, you're going to want to think about batting a little bit more. So if you use batting that has scrim, which is like a netting that holds the batting together, it's going to be harder to quilt through. Warm and Natural is one that has scrim, and I quilted a quilt with that, a queen size one. It was my first one. I did not know any better, and that quilt took forever to finish because the needle just didn't want to glide through, which I didn't understand because I had also started another project at the same time that had polyester batting, and the needle went through that so well. So I was like, I'm using the same kind of needle. I don't understand. So Hobbs 80/20 doesn't have scrim. That's an easy one to quilt through as well. Polyester batting works. This quilt I'm using wool, and I don't know if I'll ever go back. Wool batting though is very expensive. I've heard bamboo batting is beautiful to hand quilt through as well, but for the length of time it takes me to hand quilt a quilt, I will spend the extra money to now quilt with wool because it is that nice to quilt through. But the Hobbs 80/20, I've done 2 quilt, a throw quilt and a king size quilt with the Hobbs 80/20, and that was really nice to quilt through. It is a very thin batting. The wool is definitely puffier. I don't know if you can see the angle, but it's definitely a puffier, and it shows my quilting a little bit better. As you can see, I have the binding on this quilt already, and I'm not done. This is one thing I learned to do. If you baste it very, very well, and then I quilt around the outside of the quilt first, go in about 6 to 8 inches, and I finish quilting. I will stop, trim my quilt, put my binding on, and then I'll go back and finish the quilt. That's so that way that this little thing up here, that tightens my hoop, doesn't keep getting caught in the batting, and then I get little bits of fluff everywhere, and it drives me nuts. It also keeps the edge of the quilt from fraying as much. I do a I call it a victory lap when I finish my quilt top. So there's a row of stitches, probably about, I don't know, an eighth, a little under a quarter of an inch, maybe an eighth of an inch from the outside, so that the seams don't pop apart. But your backing will fray because of how much time it takes, and you're going to be moving it and whatnot. So this keeps everything from fraying by putting the binding on. You just want to make sure you've basted very well so you don't get to the middle and then have puckers and wrinkles. It's a little bit easier when you're hand quilting to smooth those out than if you're machine quilting, just because you're constantly moving it around and you're able to smooth it out and spread out any bubbling or wrinkles that you're gonna have. There's a needle there. Yeah, that's, I think, everything you need to start hand quilting. This is probably going to be a little bit of a mini series on answering any of the questions that I've gotten, as well as how to go about quilting straight lines, how to quilt curving lines, how to mark your quilt top. What else was I asked? How to do the rocking stitch. That seems to confuse a lot of people or not make sense. And I understand when you're reading it in a book, it doesn't make sense. So I will include that in another video on how to hand quilt, but these are the supplies you need.